Now is the time to discuss in more detail this important dynamic of sort of the bottom-up approach and the top-down approach to look at how it's panning out in the region, but also at a global level. So our next slot is going to look at the next session, which is looking at global and regional to local approaches and challenges in improving forest governance. For that, I would like to introduce to you the chair of that session. It's Vina, a colleague of ours, who also is the regional director for BirdLife International in Asia. I'm not very sure whether it's based in Malaysia or it's based in Singapore.
I'm based in Singapore.
Thank you, Vina. But Vina is a lawyer, so I hope he's going to use his legal expertise to facilitate this session. Before he joined BirdLife as its regional director, Vina worked for the graduate business school called INSEAD, which is a French acronym. And if my French is good, it stands for the Institute of European Business Administration. He worked there for almost 6 years as its legal counsel for Asia. But before that, Vina obtained a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Bristol here in the UK, and also an honors degree in history from the National University in Singapore, as well as a master's in law from the Paris International Law School. So on top of being the regional director for BirdLife in Asia, Vina also supports BirdLife International on matters of governance as well. So I would like to hand over to you, Vina, so that you can facilitate the next session and also introduce the speakers for this session. Over to you, Vina, and thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Richard. I hope you can hear me. I do have a background in law, but really today, with the panel that we have, I really feel like a dwarf amongst giants. We have some really good, strong speakers. We know David from the previous session, so I will not introduce you. But we have with us Siobhan Pierce. Siobhan is the Forest and Oil Palm Coordinator with the Environmental Investigative Agency. She has great expertise in matters of land rights, land tenure, the legalities of conversion of oil palm of land in Southeast Asia. He was previously with the international conservation sector for 10 years, including the Zoological Society of London, Kew Gardens, and the United Nations Environment Programme. We also have with us John Lotspeak, who's the Executive Director of Trillion Trees. Trillion Trees is a joint venture by BirdLife International, the Wildlife Conservation Society, and WWF UK. And it was conceived to speed up and scale up global efforts to end deforestation, improve forest protection, and advance forest restoration. John comes to Trillion Trees with nearly 20 years of policy, communications, and fundraising experience, and was the Senior Director of External Affairs at Marie Stopes International. We also have with us Dr. Gay Gawe. He's Senior Lecturer and Project Coordinator of Environmental Science and the National Red Plus Strategy Forest and Forest Governance Lead at the University of Papua New Guinea. She has a PhD in Resource Management and Environmental Sciences from the Australian National University in Canberra, and an MSc in Environmental Forestry from Bangor University in North Wales. We also have with us Robin Osperbeek, Regional Project Coordinator, the Centre for People and Forests, RECOFT. And Robin is a coordinator of the Voices for Mekong project funded by the European Union. so the parallel project to the EC Forest project, and that is focused on strengthening the role of civil society organizations in forest governance in Indochina. And finally, we have Tiberius Hani, who's the Flores Program Manager for Conservation and Development with Burung Indonesia. And he's been leading Burung Indonesia's program in Flores. The program, of course, there is focused very much on promoting the landscape approach to nature conservation and sustainable resource management. The session itself today really focuses, as Richard has pointed out, on global and regional to local challenges in improving forest governance, biodiversity conservation, and climate change. And there are really several objectives. What we want to do at the end of this session is to gain insights and lessons from experts in the field of forest governance, explore and identify the challenges and threats to forest landscapes face, unpack the concept of forest governance. What does that encompass? What are the aims? Who are the key stakeholders? And the different scales at which things operate. And what we want to do is understand the need for non-state actors of different kinds to play a central and important role in designing and implementing effective forest governance. So it's a whole bunch of objectives packed together. It's an exciting session. We've got some great people on this panel. And without sort of, before I sort of hand over to David, what I want to do is to say, if you have any questions for the speakers, please type them in the chat box, and please also identify the organizations that you're from. And I will try and pick up on those questions as we move through the session, and we'll save them and identify the key ones for the Q&A at the end of the session. So David, handing this over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Just before we begin, I'd just like to say that the presentation I'm going to give now is, I guess, both a top-down and a bottom-up approach, but really it's a call to action for COP26. The whole concept of governance is one that's come up in conversation, in a lot of our work over the past couple of years, in terms of, on a nakedly commercial level, about securing future supplies, about where can we trade with, how do we minimize risk in trade, and these sorts of questions. It's also come up, the initiative that we're going to put forward now, in reaction, and partly in reaction to the paper about the EUTR fitness check that the European Commission published earlier this year, and also really to look at some of the criticisms that have come forward about things like FLEGT and other other frameworks for legal governance. So if we could just move through to the next slide, please. Okay, so over the last little while, the UK TTF, working with our own government in the Department for International Development and our Forest Governance, Markets and Climates initiative within the UK government, we've been facilitating a series of workshops with trade associations across VPA countries to try and talk about, well, we have COP26 coming up, so how can we put forward a message about forest governance at COP26? So we thought we would facilitate a series of workshops to try and present one united voice for the trade associations, for the private sector across all of these different countries, to put forward a new initiative. And it would be a new global initiative towards governance and trade in forests and forest products, calling on all COP26 leaders to inject more energy, to see the importance of this, and to put more political commitment towards this. We wanted a new initiative that would be based on national standards that would all fit into an international framework. We also said, as was highlighted by other people about who runs the initiatives, we said, well, this needs a new international secretariat to administer this framework and target investment into producer countries to try and finance the reforms. And we want to use COP26 to be the launch pad to start this process. The new international secretariat was really there because it seems to us, as we'll see soon, when FLEGT was first announced and the FLEGT action plan, it started as an EU model, but it was always designed to evolve and become a global model. And we think that some of the problems that have been associated with the FLEGT action plan as it stands have been to do with the fact that it is an EU policy rather than a global policy. So can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so why are we doing it? Well, as everybody has already said today, illegal deforestation is still a huge threat, particularly from uncontrolled illegal land conversion for agriculture and other activities. The lack of governance allows a very lucrative trade in goods from illegally deforested areas. Those goods help to finance illegal operations. They provide the cash flow, and then they can fund more clearance for other activities. But it also undermines those firms that want to invest in verified sustainable forest management and production. So that those companies that want to do the right thing find that their business case is undermined. They cannot make such a strong business whilst the world of illegality operates around them. And so those legal and sustainable firms are put out of business, which then makes illegal activity even more attractive, and the circle carries on. If we look, sorry, if we could have the next slide, please. If we look around the world, and this is, I realize that I'm speaking to an audience of forestry experts, so forgive my naivety and ignorance on this, but I'm going to take a very, very broad approach. If you look in Europe, the forests are covered by national standards and regulation across the whole of Europe, and the forests have grown. In the USA, the forests are covered by national standards and regulation, and the forests are growing. In the tropical belt, that same story could be true, but it currently isn't. And the lack of effective governance over forests across the tropical belt means that forests are in decline, and over half have been destroyed since the 1960s. I'm not going to, this is not a blame game. I'm not trying to single out any countries or anything else. We're just highlighting the role of governance in leading to growth in forest. I think that it's one of the most important debates in business right now, more generally, but certainly within this sector, is the role of regulation in allowing businesses to grow. We often hear businesses complain about regulation and red tape and all of these other things. I think it's the wrong approach. I think actually regulation leads to innovation, that governance leads to growth, and that businesses need to evolve their thinking around these sort of basic philosophical and business concepts. But as regards this debate today, there is a clear line that when you have a legal and governance framework in place, you can have strong private sector activity, improving your economic outputs, improving your investments, whilst also growing those forests. So if we can have the next slide, please. So what tools do we currently have? Particularly, I'm looking at this from a private sector point of view. What tools do we have at our disposal for governance, and particularly governance when it comes to commodity management, we could say, or commodity production? Whilst you can see that with voluntary certification, you have small concessions that can be made sustainable while a whole landscape can be unsustainable. The FLEGT reforms try and raise the bar across the entire country. They promote policy and legal reforms, strengthen governance and transparency, and build capacity for law enforcement, traceability, and crucially, a proper capture of forest revenues. If we look at all this, the voluntary schemes have struggled, and they are, in fact, decreasing in size across the tropical belt. And the three things I want to highlight here, I'm conscious of my weak Wi-Fi connection. The three things I wanted to highlight here between flagged and voluntary things are permanence, scale, and transparency and accountability. When you change, if you have a forestry concession that undergoes FSC certification, it brings about all sorts of wonderful changes, but they only exist as long as that company is managing that forest to those standards, or that concession to those standards. With the flagged, they have a permanence by changing the law and changing the sort of public sector processes around that to keep those changes and positive changes in place. On a scale, they don't just do the forest concession, they do the entire country. That captures a lot of the areas in between commercial managed areas, all of the areas to get a sort of a landscape scale reform that are so important to local and indigenous people within countries. They also provide a transparency and accountability to that government and to a national process, which the certification companies only bring to their own rules and are only accountable to themselves within the confines of their operations. It's not such a sort of a democratic process within a national process. Similarly, and one of the things that I think is important to remember, the voluntary certification schemes that exist only attract the good guys. It's only those big companies with a large amount of investment that can really invest in the voluntary certification mechanisms. Whereas the flagged schemes, the country level government-led reforms, are for everybody. There is no escape. It raises that bar for the entire country. And I think it's one of the key things that we need to focus on. Can we have the next slide, please? We just get all of these pictures up. I think that then we also have a very counterproductive system when we have government-led reforms for legal reforms and legal certification, as well as a voluntary certification market. We're starting to see, particularly in Indonesia, where this is a big issue amongst forestry businesses, double payments for audits, which sort of block the expansion of sustainable forestry management schemes. And I think that there comes a point where we have to be pragmatic rather than just defending the integrity of one's own brand. We have to look about the system that we want to achieve, the outcomes that we want to achieve in terms of spreading management across that entire landscape. So people will be paying twice for an SVL car audit in the case of Indonesia, as well as, say, an FSC certification. We've always felt that this was a little bit unfair, when in fact, a lot of the reforms and a lot of the changes and a lot of the legal requirements now in countries like Indonesia and those which are going to be introduced in places like Ghana actually include most of the criteria and most of the same requirements as the voluntary certification standards. So in fact, you're paying twice for the same thing, and that there must be a way of mutually recognizing the benefits of each system within the auditing process of both the government-led reforms and the private sector certification. When we look at the area that has been certified, FSC certification, it's got a small, 2.8 million hectares. It does a lot of good work. I don't want to be bad-mouthing the role of voluntary certification. But when you look at the scale that has been managed in Indonesia from the reforms that they've made there, 12.4 million hectares of natural forests are certified to the PHPL standards. All products leaving have to reach the SVL car standard. So if we could have the next slide, please. So one of the other things that has led us to be calling for a new international initiative was some of the sort of benefits and flaws that we saw in the current model of FLEGT. At the moment, as I said earlier, it's a very EU-centric model. On the one hand, there's a very positive thing. Countries that enact public sector reform via the Voluntary Partnership Agreement are incentivized by getting recognition and a green lane into EU and UK markets. And the EU has put the policy across environment and trade to show the importance of this and to try and sort of really show the importance of sustainable international trade. The problem, I would argue, since we first introduced FLEGT, is that the EU and the UK are no longer the main market for tropical timber products. They were very important once upon a time. They still are important, but they are by no means the main markets. And those main destination markets, whether it's China, the Middle East, the USA, they do not recognize the FLEGT license. So the incentive for making these public sector reforms starts to wane and diminish. Finally, this point about having no single office or department responsible for making the policy a success, in many ways, in theory, that's a good thing. We want to put it in environment and in trade and in elsewhere. But actually, by having no one office and no one person and no one department responsible for making that a success, nobody is in fact responsible for driving it forward and pushing it out there. So we started to look at FLEGT as having all the right criteria, but the policy being held slightly in the wrong place. And in a way, I think that that's starting to be recognized by the EU through their EUTR fitness check and other papers, and that it almost needs to evolve onto a global level. So if we could have the next slide, please. So what are we calling for? We're trying to build a coalition of stakeholders towards a new tropical timber accord. And we're recognizing that tropical forests are critical for combating climate change, local development, global supply chains, and so on. All of the things that you've heard from speakers this morning. So we're developing a new accord. We will share it with all of the participants here today. And it recognizes that effective governance throughout the supply chain and within international trade can deliver positive outcomes. That you need national multi-stakeholder processes to do that, to get the credibility and enforceability and ensure the fairness. That incentivizing forest governance by offering support and encouraging foreign direct investment is the way to go. The international businesses and consumer markets need to commit to sourcing only from legal sources to ensure the sustainability of the resources in the future. And to simplify and rationalize, just as Robert was saying earlier, to simplify and rationalize the number of different standards and frameworks that exist in the market. Otherwise, we will just confuse not only the consumers, but the producers as well, as to which ones they are, which ones they're trying to work towards, which ones they're getting audited for, and which standards they work towards. Can we have the next slide, please? So the upshot of the paper that we are launching has two main calls to action. The first one says that actually we believe that the ambition and the policies within that framed by governments for FLEGT need to be refreshed and updated to frame a very practically instructive international approach. And so we are calling on the COP26 leaders to create that new international initiative. The difference being that we want it driven by the tropical timber producing countries. So those countries that have already signed a degree of commitment to a VPA process, along with their key markets, such as USA, China, Japan, and so on, to define and agree that international rules-based approach with a commitment to be underpinned by practical support, guidance, and finance. Can we have the next slide, please? That framework, I won't read out all of these words, there's too many words for a presentation. It's one of the main rules I have for giving presentations, is have fewer words, but this is taken, lifted directly from the report that we are going to be launching. just saying what that international framework would do, about setting those principles and processes by which the whole framework can work, by recognizing each country's own nationally determined norms and standards, defining the process for those rules-based systems to be recognized, to encourage governance support and strong global collaboration, to encourage consumer markets to change their policies, to encourage the responsible trade and block out the irresponsible trade, to incentivize countries to implement the governance reforms by giving their forest products industries preferential green lane access to international markets and trade. So not just with the EU, but to recognize these reforms on an international basis, backed by a strong communication and promotion campaign throughout the global supply chain. And to, crucially for us, recognize the importance of the micro and small to medium-sized enterprises as being the backbone of the economies in a lot of countries. Can we have the next slide, please? So the call to action 2 is to achieve this. We're calling for at this COP to be the launch pad to create an international secretariat that would facilitate all of those points, to facilitate global governance and help target the international investment to producer countries, to set and achieve their own national standards. We believe that the international community, not just the producers, and here I think that this is a crucial point, that we all have a duty towards making governance of tropical forests and tropical forest supply chains a key priority for COP26. It is not something we just dump on those countries that have the forests. We all have a role to play. That governance and reform is the essential basis for national standards for long term, and it must be incentivized by allowing countries to benefit from that enhanced international trade. And I think that that is a really key point. In turn, we want to be able to show that this will attract investment into legal and sustainable forestry supply chains to increase the value of those standing forests and to provide employment and opportunity for those who live in and depend on them for their livelihoods. We actually think that governance reform such as this is the basis for underpinning a whole range of other forest policy objectives as well. It's not just about the timber trade, it's about REDD+, ecosystem services, carbon management. All of those other things require a degree of governance and a framework for governance and legal activity in the forests. Otherwise, who is going to invest? Without a legal support, without a legal framework in place, who is going to invest in any of those other policy schemes that the climate change talks will be discussing? So the next slide, please. Oh, if we could.
We're running out of time, but
okay. So this is the very last ones now. We really think that this is a big opportunity to match up those forests with international markets, and that the greater governance will be the key towards increasing trade, enhancing trade, and enhancing investment back into those countries. And if I have the last slide, please. So in summary, I think the private sector is fully on board with we've got the support of most of the private sector organizations now in countries around the world towards the view that greater governance brings multiple benefits, that those new global initiatives need to be driven by and given an equal voice for tropical nations, and that an international secretariat would help bring the focus and drive to a lot of the processes already in motion through the flagged action plan, the VPAs and other initiatives. I'm hoping that COP26 is the best place to start that process. We're going to be launching this report at COP26 at a number of places. We will share the details with you very soon. And we hope to build a coalition amongst a whole range of different actors, and particularly the audience here today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, David. I think I was really struck by several things you said, including the fact that really regulation can be a force for innovation, which is something that we don't often think about. The fact that we need rules which are a lot simpler And we need to sort of make it easier for those who want to comply and those who are willing to do the right thing. Let me sort of hand this over to Siobhan.
Yes, I am good to go. Thank you. I'm actually going to turn my video off. I hope that's okay, just because my connection isn't great, and hopefully I won't have the same problem as David. So I'm just going to give a brief update, and I will try and keep it brief because I know we're short on time, on the FLEGT and the EU timber regulation in relation to the fitness check, which we've already been hearing about, and also the new regulation expected from the EU in relation to deforestation. And in case you don't know, I work for EIA, the Environmental Investigation Agency, and we work to investigate and campaign against environmental crime and abuse. And we've been involved with FLEGT and the EUTR since its inception, really, notably in Indonesia, but also in other Southeast Asian countries. So next slide, please. So just to recap, I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but the FLEGT action plan really constitutes three main elements: the EU timber regulation that prohibits the placing of illegally harvested timber and timber products on the EU market, and creates obligations for those placing timber on the EU market, such as companies and other operators, to conduct due diligence to ensure this. We've then got the voluntary partnerships agreements, where producing countries can voluntarily enter into those as trade agreements to work with the EU to ensure the timber coming from their countries is legal. And then, of course, the FLEGT regulation that establishes a licensing system for those VPA countries, whereby their timber is deemed as legal, and therefore the operators do not need to conduct the same due diligence. So next slide, please. So we've already heard a little bit about this from other speakers, but the EU has been conducting a fitness check of the EU TR and the FLEGT, which it does on a periodic basis. It's basically an evaluation of the regulation, and it started its latest fitness check of the EU TR and FLEGT late last year. And earlier this year, it published some interim conclusions from that. The actual final report isn't yet made public, but we understand it has now been approved as such. But it did present some of its interim conclusions, some which were more positive, particularly around the involvement of stakeholders and improving governance, which we have already heard about. However, surprisingly, it made some quite negative comments, which we would maybe or talk about a bit later, but you could maybe say are contested, that there is no evidence that VPAs have contributed to illegal logging, reduced illegal logging in partner countries, that it's a slow and very costly process, and I would say some, yes, quite negative connotations for VPAs, even though the fitness check was primarily focused on the UTR and FLEGT rather than VPAs. And it also said they might change some elements of FLEGT, for example, those elements which it's perceived as not working well, such as the licensing, so the FLEGT licensing, and may replace those with alternative mechanisms. So these are quite surprising preliminary conclusions that the EU came up with. So next slide, please. So I think before I go any further, it's just worth remembering what the VPA process is about and how unique it is. We've already heard this from some of the other speakers, but although it's a voluntary process, you then enter into a legally binding trade agreement. It is a participatory consultatory process involving the private sector, government, and civil society. It's an open process with minimal secrecy. Parties negotiate towards the same goals. And for trade agreements, this is very different to how normal trade agreements are conducted often. They're often behind closed doors. There often is not this participation of any of these different stakeholders. Also, we've heard, as we've already heard, they embed legal and governance reforms, and while the focus is on defining legality, of course, as part of that process, you can improve the social and environmental aspects of legality as well as economic or whatever else. And as we've seen from the VPA processes that have been undertaken to date, they can indeed help to reform laws and do that, such as unclear land tenure rights, weak or inconsistent law enforcement, contradictory laws, or overlapping institutional responsibilities. And I think, as everybody would recognize, reforming laws and having a process that is participatory and multi-stakeholder does take time in any country or as part of any process, whatever that may be. So next slide, please. And just to note where we are with VPAs, obviously the EU in its preliminary findings has outlined only one country has reached FLEGT licensing. But of course, a number of other countries have signed VPAs, and these, as you look at this list, are some of the most forested tropical countries in the world, while a number of other countries have started negotiations, and most recently Honduras, it was this year, signed its VPA. So it's worth noting this good progress, even though we've, as I just mentioned, this can be a long process because it is a process that is multi-stakeholder, open, and looks to reform laws. Next slide, please. So going back to those preliminary conclusions from the EU as part of its fitness check, our view is maybe slightly different, and I've taken some recent papers here that outline some different conclusions from CIFOR most recently, just last year. They found there's been a decrease in illegal logging rates, and the VPA has contributed positively towards those. And this graphic down here is from that paper. And similarly, there has been mentioning and through interviews and assessment that FLEGT VPA has resulted in lower impact timber harvesting, improved forest tracking systems, and helped reduce the negative impacts. So I think there are definitely some positive stories out there from the literature. I think it's also important to note that obviously we only have one country with FLEGT licensing so far. And we also do have a number of problems with EU TR enforcement itself in EU member states. So actually trying to assess the efficiency and benefits of the whole system at this stage is not that easy. And of course, there is always room for improvement. But I think what we're seeing is improvements and positives from the process, not only in relation to illegal logging, but others that we've mentioned, the better participation of stakeholders, whether that's civil society or communities and so forth. And a feeling that we need to preserve this progress rather than not doing so. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So at the same time, the EU has been conducting the fitness check of the EUTR and FLEGT. It's also been looking at bringing in a new regulation to address the EU's role in deforestation and forest degradation worldwide, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. And of course, these two processes are linked. And in some ways, of course, that fitness check will feed into what it decides to do in the new regulation. We are expecting that new proposed regulation from the EU to come out very soon, later this year. We're expecting it to be a due diligence type regulation, so similar to what the EUTR is, so building on some of the successes and lessons learned from that, where companies will still have to assess and mitigate their risks. And it's expected to, of course, apply to placing of forest risk commodities on the EU market. So not just timber, but other commodities that are linked to deforestation, of course, like palm oil, soy, beef, cocoa, etc., as deemed necessary. It's also, I will say, worth mentioning that the UK is also looking to bring in a similar due diligence regulation, but I won't go into detail that, but just to note it. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the fitness check and the proposal to bring in a new regulation, which the EU started consulting on last year, are linked. And we are understanding that potentially the EUTR will be combined into this new deforestation regulation. So as I already mentioned, it is expected to be a due diligence type regulation like the EUTR is at the moment. So it will combine the EUTR as it is into that, but it will also go beyond that in that it will cover other agricultural commodities, as I mentioned, and not just require those commodities to be legal, but free from deforestation and forest degradation, as well as potentially other criteria. So while we understand the EUTR part of the flagged action plan will be combined into that, it's much less certain how the current VPAs and flagged licenses will be retained and recognized as part of that, which, as I think we've heard again today, is leading to some concerns. So next slide, please. So as we've already heard, potentially VPAs are going to be replaced with an alternative support mechanism, which as yet is undefined. Potentially we've got a removal of the licensing element from that alternative support mechanism, which I think, as David and others said, is a key part of the VPAs. It creates that trade incentive. So there are concerns about what is going to happen to that. And we've heard about forest partnerships as a proposed alternative to the VPA mechanism. However, again, there are concerns around this because forest partnerships were not established for this purpose. It's not overly clear what forest partnerships will look like so far, and leaves a lot of uncertainty there for what the EU support for improved forest governance will be going forward. Next slide, please.
Yep. 1 minute more.
Oh, right, I will try to be quick. While we've got these, I would say, somewhat mixed signals coming from the EU, from the NGO community, there's actually been a lot of quite wide support, I would say, for the EUTR and flagged. And this was a paper that was put out earlier this year, and I won't read you the recommendations, and you can look at the paper further if you wish, but it does outline the broad support for the EU to keep on continuing investing in VPAs, the flagged licensing system, to tackle corruption, to ensure forest diplomacy and improve governance, and help and support countries to do that. Next slide, please. So also, non-surprisingly, perhaps there has been concern raised from VPA's countries themselves in relation to those preliminary findings from the fitness check. From here on the left, we've got a paper from Indonesian civil society, and also on the right here, we have the response from the minister in the Republic of Congo on the need to not undermine the process and speaking out in support of flagged. Next slide, please. And this is my final slide, you'll be glad to know. Oh, sorry. So the final thoughts to leave you with, I think, and maybe they're best summed up by the Vice Presidents of the EU Parliament, that the basis of any good progress is good governance and lack of corruption, and which would not throw away VPAs and flag because they have done just that. Of course, no process is perfect. There's always improvements that can be made. We know flagged and VPA process can be long, but it can indeed be a worthwhile process. And it's really important not to lose the work that has gone into that. And we need a clear way forward and agreements as part of any new regulation or anything that comes out of the EU to enable countries to be supported to improve their governance. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Siobhan. I think the point that you make about VPAs and whether they ultimately have been successful or not is an important one, and it just highlights the need, I think, for us to continue to evaluate the systems that we put in place to deal with some of these issues. And even if they have been successful, they can be more successful. So it's I think important that we continue to look at these things. Let me now hand over to John Lotspeech, who's the Executive Director of Trillion Trees. Take it away.
Thank you very much. And Danielle, I wonder if I might share my screen rather, just because I noticed that the font wasn't going very well. So if that's all right, can everyone see those slides? Forwards to accelerate the, yes?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity. This has been, even just in getting up early in the UK and listening, I've learned so much. And I appreciate the opportunity for Trillion Trees, and thank you to the organizers for including us to offer sort of what I perceive a chance for the implementer side of forest governments, just to give a little bit of perspective of how we as a partnership see both forest governance working, in particular this idea of inclusive conservation as well. So Trillion Trees really is going to be the one that is helping to deliver forest conservation within these frameworks that we're talking about today. And so what I wanted to take a moment to is say, I feel very privileged to be in this group of people who are already convinced of the power of forest and already know how important forests are to our future, both to the planet, both to the people, and to the biodiversity that we steward. But it is really, really important that we remember that, that there are lots of competing priorities. And I thought maybe just telling you a little bit of how we came together, because these three organizations do loads of things in oceans, they do things in savanna, so it's not just forests. So why did we come together around forests? And part of our creation story, if you will, is that we looked at what the situation of the planet, what these conservations were doing, and we realized that there's something that existed that we've begun to think of as the triple challenge, and that we know that the climate is in crisis. We know, because of the organizations that we were watching biodiversity vanish, decreased by 68% since the 70s. And that increasingly, what was not being addressed in this bigger challenge is how much the poor and the marginalized, the people living in the communities, indigenous peoples, were some of the ones that were the least empowered to help us do this. So we as conservation organizations sort of looked at this and said, well, one of the things that's obvious across all the places that we work is that forests really are one of the most cost-effective, and now the term is nature-based solutions to help meet this triple challenge. And I guess I would like to call out here, particularly to this group who are already convinced of the power of forests, to remember that we do need to keep telling this story, that forests really can do a lot of the things of helping indigenous people realize their rights to govern their own lands, to the biodiversity crash that another COP will be looking at later, and the climate crisis that's facing us. So what are we going to do about that as implementers? Well, we came together just about 5 years ago as what I like to call a joint venture. And it's exactly to speed up and scale up to try and deliver the benefits of forest that can help us meet this triple challenge. And I'm going to go through a couple of things of why we think this particular partnership is a little bit different than what had come before. And the thing I wanted to pull out for this group in particular, and particularly this question of governance, is that we uniquely are starting to think of ourselves as delivering forest in the last line of this slide here, which is that we need to deliver for people first, so that the things that we do, the interventions that we undertake, stick for longer because there's buy-in with the people in and around the forest. Then the nature comes naturally, whether it's good agroforestry, whether it's stewardship, whether it's a national park. And then the climate benefits come naturally. We had a really good session with the European Investment Bank, Infrastructure Bank the other day, where the interlocutor was saying, the problem, so much of the money is fixed around climate. Whereas we know that if we lean forward with people, the nature comes and climate gets done anyway. So should we be looking at how we build the funding for the governance structures? And everyone on here knows this, but this is actually the value proposition of our partnership, is that it will respond to things that people care about, and that that we believe people will fund for. We know that forests are a stronghold for nature. There's a statistic there. We know they can stabilize the climate, particularly around emissions reductions, which the world is caring about. And there is enormous economic opportunity in and around the forests. And importantly, and again, I come back to my opening statements, we do need people to believe this with us. And we're finding increasingly that citizens are engaged. So when we're thinking about what we have to do around governance and what we need to ask people, we can rely on the public to become our allies, and particularly for us as implementers who need backing and people to support some of these difficult choices that we're going to have to make. And I won't read all of these to you again, because many of you will be aware of these, but I really am impressed by the center lower statistic of how many people are willing to realize that they may need to change something. You know, going back to David's proposition, it may mean that maybe there's a slight increase in cost thanks to this stewardship in the Secretariat, but people are willing to look at that, and we should be heartened by that when we look to what we need to do. Tree and trees then, in looking at this global question of how we can help governance get better embedded into how we intervene in forests, is that Tree and Trees tried to look at what are the factors that the world cares about and then increasingly the world is investing in. You know, across our partnership, you know, Patricia said in her introduction, there's 115 BirdLife partners, and most of them do some forest work. But what we've decided to do at Tree and Trees, and this is where I think we start to get into our uniqueness, is that we've decided to sort of pre-select a lot of the places where we think we can intervene, where we can get the most impact. You may have noticed that I said in the introductory slide that we said that we try to protect or restore a tree and trees by 2050. Increasingly, we all know that we really have about a decade to pull this off. So what Tree and Trees has done has tried to pre-identify some of the places where we can have our most impact. And so we've selected 60 countries across which we work, where we will focus a lot of our efforts. Many of them, not surprisingly, as we talked about, focus on the tropical forest where there is so much crisis. We've identified 402 million hectares where we are active as a partnership. And the statistics that touch in those 402 million hectares are 66 million people living in and around the forest. There are 202,485 indicator species for biodiversity. And that for the climate, that we can estimate that there's 104 gigatons of carbon currently being stored just where we work. So we believe that our partnership has a responsibility to take these parameters, understand that as we put governance structures into place, that we have to identify what we are going to do. And so that's the second thing that I think is unique about this partnership, is we will put our hands up for accountability on the progress that we think we can do, because the world has to go faster and bigger if we're going to achieve any of the ambitions that we're talking about today. And a key consideration for us, despite our name being Tree and Trees, is that if all the things we've talked about today, that it is absolutely vital that we plant lots of trees, because that's the narrative that's going on there. But I wanted to take a moment to let you all know that we know that even if we are planting trees, that we also have to protect and grow that tree and nurturing it to a full maturity to offer all these benefits we're talking about. So our shorthand for this is an investment in forests, not just trees, is the true solution for the planet. And note, I didn't say solution for the climate, it's for the planet, and that speaks to the people and the nature around it. So Tree and Trees then has what we call our 3 imperatives to govern what we hope the governance structures we're talking about will do. Is that we know that we must, at the very beginning, protect the standing forests that we have. When we need to restore, it needs to be good restoration, grounded in communities, and absolutely with those things to grow and nurture so that we can get the long term. And we recognize that as a partnership, and certainly as each of the partners, that we have a deep, 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 deep obligation to work towards the ending the causes of deforestation. And I tip my hat to BirdLife, one of the hosts of today's session, in that they do just some incredible work in cocoa and rubber that we participate in, that just want to give a shout out about recognizing that if we don't stop the consumer demand, then we have more problems doing the first 2 of these. And so we are quite proud of the last 4.5 years of taking an initial investment of around about 5 million, and we've been able to leverage that into almost 100 million pounds of investment into forest landscapes. A lot of that is the policy work that we're talking about today, and shout out to one of our partners, WWF, who does some spectacular background policy work for us. We've added on to those hectares that you saw earlier, 59 million hectares that are protected or being restored thanks to the efforts of this partnership. And because tree counting is so growing, I thought I would put up that we calculate that there's about 20.1 billion trees being protected or restored thanks to the efforts. But why is this important? Because it's nice to have data, but I think data is how we're going to step forward in this governance question. So we as a Tree and Trees, despite our name, will begin to speak far less about trees, but more about the hectares, which we believe speaks more to what we need to measure to get some of the benefits we've talked about earlier in this presentation. So our commitment will be about the number of hectares, and this speaks to everything that David and Siobhan were talking about before. What does improved management look like? What are the governance structures can do this? But what we know is, as implementers, we will be standing side by side with you all to say that we will be there to move, we hope, in the next 5 years, 70 million hectares into better improved management, so that we can hope that the longevity of these forests and the benefits they deliver can continue. We also know that the protected forests that are so vital to the central level of this have to be better protected. So whether that's a new national park or better enforcement of what we have already, we will commit as a partnership to increase by 35 million hectares in the next 5 years, better protection. But we also know that the other flip side of that coin is that we have to also restore what we've already lost. And so this partnership will commit to moving 20 million hectares into what we call quality restoration. And that means really trying to get closer to what the forest benefits were originally. The composite benefit is that we hope and we pledge that we will try to reduce by 50% the deforestation in the landscapes of those 60 countries that I've talked about before. So here's the snapshot of the 60 countries. You'll see it's a lot of the places we've already talked about before. Again, I say there's another 50 countries where the partnership does, but this is what we tried to focus on for this next while to increase and speed up our own timeline. And even because restoration, and this is the UN decade of restoration, have also taken some time to pre-identify, if you will, where this partnership can make a difference. And I think probably one of the final things I'd like to say about the partnership is that we are really working hard for us not to, in a country, say like Brazil or Argentina or Cambodia, where all three of us are working, or Kenya or Tanzania or Uganda, we don't try and just do 3 separate conservation pieces of work. We try and take the skill set of this partnership and blend them into a way that can advance forest governance in a particular jurisdiction. So for example, the BirdLife partner often has amazing community connections because they're all national organizations. We might find that in that particular country, WWF has higher political connections to help us get in front of the ministers we need to get in front of. And it may be that in this particular country I'm thinking of, the WCS works in some of the most remote, hardest to reach places to do some of the best forest work to protect some of the timber under threat, for example. So by thinking in this integrated way, we believe as a partnership that we can be more accountable, we can drive the progress more quickly, and recognize that we can use different sets from the 3 implementers rather than just trying to replicate our own thing. And my final call to you all is that as you think about implementing governance structures locally, nationally, regionally, and globally, is that what we find is very often the true cost of doing good work is not calculated. So again, we think of sort of 5 things that would help us calculate the cost and to be able to therefore mobilize resources around it. And I won't go into deep detail because I'm aware of time, but first, make sure you're grounded in good sourcing. It's local teams, it's local governance, and resources that you can rely on that are grounded in the forests and communities you work in. Please remember that when doing this, that the best way to get the best cost out of it is to plan within your ecosystem. And we like to call that right trees in right places. You can really come up with something that looks like good governance, but if you've got an enormous amount of, for example, foreign species, we find that long-term that is not as sustainable as we think that it should be to accrue the benefits we're all going for. In restoration, remembering not the dollar a tree is absolutely fine to get it in the ground. You need to have the resources to grow and guard that tree, not just the planting when you're looking at governance structures. And governance structures should also have monitoring and evaluation, not just so that we can write good reports at the end of a project, but so that we can adapt the program as we go along. And this is the budget line that most often gets left out. So my call for this group is to remember to put the full cost of what we're trying to do. And when you're looking at the importance of forests, do remember, as I open this, that not everyone is as convinced of forests as everyone on this call and in this consortium of today are. So remember to translate our forest outputs, which I think of as trees and hectares, into key global outcomes that people care about. So the rights and opportunities for communities, the measures of biodiversity that are going to keep our climate and our planet balanced. And finally, the climate benefits like carbon. So do remember that when we're excited about measuring the trees and the hectares and forests, that we need to translate that into the triple challenge. And I thank you for this opportunity to present our perspective as implementers and look forward to further discussion.
Thanks a lot, John. I mean, there's one thing I'll take away personally from your presentation. It's the message, keep telling the story. And there's a real risk, I think, certainly with climate finance, that we forget local people. We forget indigenous interests. And we've got to make sure that that people element gets worked into the narrative. And also like the fact that it's not about sort of investing in trees, but investing in forests. It's a simple sort of message, but it's one that we're often guilty of forgetting. So thanks so much for your presentation. Let's go on to Robin Os de Beek, who's a regional project coordinator for RECOFT.
First of all, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of RECOFT, I would like to thank the organizers of the forum for giving us the opportunity to offer a presentation with such a distinctive audience and panelists. I was very impressed about the presentations and the contribution made so far. Before I start, and for those who are not yet familiar with RECOFT, just let me quickly introduce the organization by saying that it's not a huge, but I think it's importantly a unique environmental nonprofit organization in Asia and the Pacific, with over 30 years of experience promoting community forestry as an entry point for sustainable development and climate change solution. We are most happy for all of you to join hands with us. So my call here, maybe not too much directed to the COP26, but beyond that, really a call to join hands with the work that we're doing. Our main office is in Bangkok, but we also value our strong presence in countries like Cambodia, Indonesia, in Laos, Myanmar, Nepal, Thailand, and Vietnam. I think if you show the next slide, you have the map there on the next slide. Yeah, our focus is on strengthening capacity of all concerned stakeholders, particularly around community forestry, but beyond that, much more beyond that, with the aim to transform differences, disparities into collaboration. Through this presentation, we have been asked, and we are very pleased to highlight both what is the need and what are the ways to bridge gap between civil society and government, which we know is quite a common topic, particularly, I mean, not only in the Asia Pacific and beyond, but particularly now for in this topic on the forestry sector in Southeast Asia. I hope someone, maybe those who are listening from West Africa or Central Africa, they may also, see, the importance of having someone play such a regional role in that area as well. So the aim is to sort of unpack what it means and what it requires to become I would call it like a trusted conciliator between civil society and the government in particular, and to show how this has not only empowered these actors, but strengthened their cooperation, leading to some concrete sustainable results that particularly, value inclusiveness and gender equality. So in my presentation, I will try to share key elements of RECOFT Sustain let's call it sustained conciliating part. Someone call it trusted broker role, but I will try to zoom a bit more into the Mekong region and use the opportunity to highlight some of the example and lessons learned, particularly through the Voices for Mekong Forest project, which I'm coordinating, and which we have been implementing in the Mekong region since 2017 with funding from the European Union. I mean, this project is, we sometimes call it sister or twin project with a non-state actor in forest governance, strengthening non-state actor involvement in forest governance that you are organizing, or even the citizen voices for change that the EU is financing in the Congo Basin. So I call them all, we are working a bit, or try to work jointly with all these, you know, twin, triple string projects. So the question before I may unpack, and I see you have the slide there already, before I go into how to, you know, talking about how we attain to bridge the gap between government and civil society, I would like to quickly highlight some few reasons why we think it's important to have someone fulfilling such roles, a bridging role. On the next slide, yes. So I'm just mentioning a few here. So we heard about that already in previous presentation, particularly those related to the reflective EPA. But we do believe, first of all, that there are opportunities, and it is important to promote ongoing decision-making processes such as the reflective EPA, the RED+, and other reforms in the forestry sector, where it is key to ensure multi-stakeholder participation. And we already see how these have open space for addressing topics that traditionally have been a bit sensitive to discuss. So we see that opportunity, and we want to tap into it. Secondly, there's the need to strive for a more balanced and fair power relation particularly between government and non-state actors, civil society, which also means to enhance a bit the shrinking or sometimes limited space of civil society to engage in forest governance. And thirdly, as we all know, the interest, the knowledge, the resources, and maybe to some extent even the view of the world often differs, you know, between the two stakeholders, and this frequently leads to some sort of antagonism rather than collaboration or synergies. And the last point why we think it's important to have this role or someone to play this role, bridging role, is although there might be many more than this, we believe it's crucial to ensure that there's a deliberative process allowing inclusive and equitable access and exchange of information. And I think it's important to examine, you know, issues and hopefully aim to reach some level of consensus and, you know, have some level of informed decision-making processes. So to make all this happening, that's why, we RICOFT, I think it's playing an important role in bridging the collaboration between government and non-state actors. So if we go to the next slide, I'm now trying to, it's a bit showing, like I say, a bit showing how we're doing that. I mean, and what makes, I think, RICOFT quite unique. I've been working in Latin America, in Africa, and a lot in Asia, but I really appreciate the role, and I'm very proud to work with RICOFT. And now the presentation here is about, what makes it so unique, or what are the important elements of in order to be able to bridge the gap between civil society and the government. So I will go through them, hopefully within the time that is given. We have about, I think, 8-9 of those elements. So the first one is about the importance of establishing, I mean, why we're able to do that. I think it's because we have been able to establish and nourish a long-lasting and quite trustful relationship with stakeholders, all sort of stakeholders. In this regard, I would like to highlight RICOFT's 30 years of engaging and maintaining the relationship, the exchanges with a huge number of alumni, more than 60,000 by now, who have become pioneers in community forestry and are now in both higher level government position decision-making position, but also leading many international, national civil society organizations. And also importantly, we do that particularly by valuing the strengths. So we're not really looking at pinpointing any, put a finger on potential weaknesses, but it's really about building up the strengths, both within the civil society and within the authorities, concerned authorities. And also importantly, we nourish and sustain engagement at community level. There's a long example here I would like to see, but there's a long story of RICOP's engagement, for example, in Cambodia on promoting community forestry. It started in the 1990s when the first seeds of community, some sort of community-led forest management were sown in Cambodia. And then we have been continuing engaging with government, with local communities, with other, civil society practitioners, even with the private sector in establishing strong networks. So by now there's a really strong network of partners that we have that are dedicated to capacity building, to policy change, and to any form of formalization of community forestry that we can build on. And we even, after in 2008, the Community Protected Area Act law was also passed. And so we even have been able now to expand and bring principle of community forestry into community protected area as well. And I think we're trying working with all those, stakeholders, partners quite successfully on that. But we've been, that's why I feel this long time nourishing relationship had now moved, it's expanded a lot. If I can bring some example from the project that I'm managing, the Voices for Mekong Forest project, we're now establishing and strengthening a federation of community protected areas. Within that community protected area federation, we also strengthen the women voice. So we have women leaders from community protected areas who also have established their own Facebook page. They share experience, they exchange knowledge, they raise their concerns. So there's a very dynamic process going on there in supporting also the voice of women in the process. We have also launched a mobile application that allows for, we call it real-time monitoring of forest governance. So that is used in patrolling and looking at the forest, both community forestry and community protected areas. And at a more high level, we are also working with the Forest Administration and the Ministry of Environment, again, building on alumni who have been trained already 20, 30 years ago, and now working with them in developing their respective gender mainstreaming action plans. The one from the Ministry of Environment is just being published these days. So I think, again, a very close collaboration built on nourish long-term relationship. And importantly, we're now also engaging and supporting civil society in the Red Cross processes. So we support the CSO Red Cross network, who has already contributed both in the development of the Red Cross strategy, the Red Cross action and investment plan, and even the Red Cross, they call it Prakas, the guideline. So as you can see, building, starting, but over the time, nourishing the relationship, expanding the engagement, very important for having that trusted conciliation role. I'll try to go a bit fast. So another thing that we think is very important is really try to build that reciprocal appreciation among the two, let's say, stakeholders we're talking about. And I can bring here the example related to the FLEG TVPA in Lao PDR. Again, as you can see, we have been supporting, not only us, there's so many other organizations supporting the civil society network to effectively engage in the FLEG TVPA negotiation. The fourth round of negotiation took place last year, where the civil society really had a strong voice, strong influence on the timber legality definitions. There will be the fifth round by the end of this year, where they will also work on the timber legality assurance system, transparency and access, supply chain control. So again, we see a strong collaboration, opportunity for collaboration between government and civil society. And particularly in this case, I would say even the government representative and even the EU representative have already acknowledged, appreciated such a stronger role of civil society. And we are supporting similar initiatives in Vietnam, where the BPA is already signed. In Thailand, we're doing that, as like I mentioned, with the Red Cross processes, civil society engagement in Cambodia. And even in Myanmar, we are supporting CSO engagement in community forestry, always building, trying to build on, showing how the added value from the both stakeholders plays the important role there. If we can move to the next slide. So another thing that we we do, and we think it's very important and essential pillar of our approach, is to regularly support and engage stakeholders in analysis and what we call like more participatory action research. There's an example that I mentioned here, very recent, also supported by the Voices for Mekong Forest project, which is about the legal analysis on Community Forestry Act, which was just passed in 2019 for Thailand. So this was again a very important element in supporting civil society. They helped them already to unpack the legal framework and identify ways to influence subsidiary regulations. They already managed to do that. I want to make some in Thailand, because I call it some advertisement, because as you can see on the slide, I would like to take the opportunity to encourage you also, whether you're from the government, from the academic, from civil society, from the media, from the private sector, there's opportunity now that we would like to offer for you to join our recently established network of researchers. We call it Explore. So applications are open currently. So for anyone who wants to submit concept notes for some research related to forest governance and beyond in the region. So we encourage you to do so. I cannot go too much in all the details of that, but you can visit our report website, or if you have time to get the link, or maybe when you get the presentation, you can go into the link. And please, we look forward now. Like I said, the call is open to get concept notes, and you will find all the guidelines, all the instructions on how to do that on that website. If you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Fourth pillar of our approach is to regularly support national and regional seminars, where we try to bring together government, civil society representatives to share their experience and have a bit of safe space where they can more openly debate whether on policy reforms or other exchange other views. The pandemic has a little bit narrowed down, shrinked our opportunities, but we continue to do that online through webinars or events like the one we are happy to participate in now. I'm just putting here an example where, for example, through V4MF, Voices for Mekong Forest project, we brought civil society. We had other projects within RECOP where we could bring representatives from the Asian Social Forestry Working Group and then let them debate 3 days on unpacking progress and future perspective on social forestry. So it's not coming and making presentation PowerPoints. Sorry if I'm making a boring one here, but it's really about looking at the different elements and have group work and discussion and build again that relationship and safe environment for exchanging experiences. So that's again something important that we feel we're doing. So now I come to what probably RECOP is most known for, which is training and capacity building. This of course is and remains an important pillar of RECOP work. Here, once again, a few examples of training that we have supported through the V4MF project, whether it's on conflict resolution or whether it's on tenure rights recognition. Those trainings are there. We can even continue to offer them in the future. If anyone is interested, please let us know about that. And as I show on the slide, we also sort of embracing a bit the digital area by offering free online courses. There's been one already, which is now running its second batch on Community Forestry 101. We already got about, I think, 1,500 or 2,000 participants there. So I found it really, even myself, very impressed on how quickly, how vast you can reach with such online courses. But again, I do some sanapsanondoi here by again, launching and encouraging you to apply to a second online training that we have, which is about policy analysis and forest governance. It's just been launched and it's still open for enrollment. So please, anytime go to our website, you can enroll. And once you have enrolled, you can then, for the next couple of months, run the training online yourself whenever you have time. There are also some exercises, some things to be done. There will be some certificates also given when you complete the course. But yeah, the only thing I have to say, the enrollment time. So now we open the enrollments, and then I think this one goes until end of the month, or I have to check. But then, after that, it's about everyone participating in the training, and then in the future we will open enrollments again. But again, capacity building there, now moving to digital area. I hope the topic is really interesting for most of you who are listening here, and we look forward to get as many of you attending this training. Yeah, I think this we already touched about. So it's really about facilitating open dialogue at all levels. I mean, because we have our presence in the country, and because we have so many local partners, stakeholders that we're working with, we are really able to start at community level, organizing meetings there where particularly also women and marginalized households can raise their concern and contribute in decision making. We then try to bring the concerns there through the network of those community level organizations, maybe at subnational or national level, where we have more like multi-stakeholder meetings. But even by doing so, I show here an example from Cambodia, where together with the NGO Forum for Cambodia, within V4MF, every year we have the National Forum on natural resource governance. But it's really like it's always like 2-3 days, but the first 1 or 2 days is really helping those civil society representatives to frame their message, raise their concern, so that on the last day, when we bring all the concerned authorities, they have the chance to very systematically put their points and professionally raise their agenda. So I think an important role that we also try to play here with our partners. And of course, RICOP then also going the global level, where you attend like the COP26, so all these big events where you then try to bring the key messages from the grassroots level to also create awareness and trigger some required awareness and action at the international level. I want to make a underline also the importance of promoting gender equality and women empowerment. Really, we invest a lot on that. Cultivating participation, social inclusion, and gender equity is one of the 6 core values of RICOF. I already mentioned before, if you remember, some successful example of V4MF work in Cambodia, where we now, both the Forest Administration and the Ministry of Environment are in the stage of finalizing the gender mainstreaming action plan for the different agencies. I think that's a great support, and we do that. Again, at RICOF, we work programmatically. So it's V4MF working with what we call the WAVES program, Weaving Leadership for Gender Equality in Asia Pacific. So aiming at promoting gender equality in the governance, management, and use of forest landscape. We believe, to have transformative change, we need to find the champions. Sometimes it's important, and this program, WAVES program, is really about finding the champion who can advocate and negotiate such change. So we have now a network of we call WAVE champions or leaders in the 7 countries, and they're all at their own level with their own institution, try to mainstream gender in the programs and in their institutions. We even now expanded that and have a bit more narrow focus on promoting gender equality in the recognition of customary land and forest tenures. There's another program that we are happy to be part of, which is the Mekong Region Land Governance Initiative. We call it MRLG, which is supported by the SDC, Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. And we're also there, again, working with champions on strengthening gender equality in the recognition of customary land and forest tenures. Something also, I don't know how unique it is, but we found very important and really very effective is increasingly engaging and working with university. We've been done definitely a lot. We're based in the university in Bangkok, but at the same time also now bringing more other stakeholders like a journalist on board. Again, also through the V4MF, we have been doing several trainings either regionally or at country level for journalists who are interested or already engaged maybe in forest governance, help them unpack forest governance, have them, have a bit more understanding on the issues, but beyond that, also helping them and giving them the opportunity to then make their own investigation, their own research, and public articles. So we do some mentoring and coaching for them also in public articles. We have been successfully on that, particularly in Thailand, Myanmar, and Vietnam. I have an example here, very good example, achieved in collaboration with Pan Nature from Vietnam, who trained journalists there, and those journalists have been then supported in their investigation. They published, like a 10 lines of articles about topics, and those even got high-level awards in the country. But on top of that, most importantly, they really triggered some action also by the concerned authorities, even leading to some arrestments of rangers who were involved in some illegal logging activities. So again, very powerful, very important to engage also with universities and medias, and that also in one way, on one hand, it helps to have a broader outreach, to the overall public, but at the same time also opens the door to work with the youth. I think, yeah, more and more we see the value of engaging and supporting. We are supporting, for example, in Thailand, we're supporting a youth movement of young journalists who wants to, get more knowledgeable on forest-related issues. We see it globally. I mean, we can all witness it, how more and more the youth are raising their voices and really demanding for some actions to address the climate crisis and other environmental things. So more and more opening that space for also the youth to be engaged from an early stage. In RICOP, we also organize, I forgot to put an example there, but every year together with FAO and the UNDP, we organize a youth panel where, you open this opportunity for new generation to come and raise their concerns and have higher level, sometimes even ambassadors or ministerial representatives who attend the events and have the open exchanges. And that, we think, builds a new generation of someone who will hopefully take care of the forest in the future. Quickly, another slide. I think I'm almost there. Yeah. So I'm sure you cannot read anything there. You will see a lot of bubbles, but this is just to show, the importance of leveraging support and coordination and synergies among, with others. My call, like I said at the beginning, would be, please, anyone who wants to join, we're happy to join hands and work together. I already saw some good opportunities in the presentations before, and I look forward to more of them coming. This is an example of, what you can see in all this bubble is, again, only one project, the Voices for Mekong Forest project. We tried to make a bit of stakeholder mapping, looking into the sustainability of the project. And I mean, that the picture in itself and the colors in itself show how important it is and how much we need at RICOP to engage with the, have this partnership and have this stakeholder collaboration throughout the region. I think that's the essence of really playing this conciliating role at such scale. We could not do that, and we could not reach down to grassroots level, up to global level without, all these amazing networks of organizations, stakeholders. Every color is a different type of stakeholder, whether it's government, whether it's private sector, whether it's civil society, whether it's academia. But again, one picture to show the importance of leveraging support, coordination, and synergies, and again, fundamental in the RICOP strategy. And I think I'm almost there now. Maybe the next slide. Again, so bridging the gap. These are the different things. I know many, and even when we were asked to make the presentation here, can you show how RICOP has been able to sustain its role in capacity building over the last 30 years? I really felt it's important to show capacity building, but what that also entails, many other elements, and then many more than that, I hope in some way I've been able to glimpse through in this presentation. And sustainability, if you go to the next slide, and I come back also to the V4MF project. The V4MF project is also ending quite soon in December, and the sustainability of what we're doing, and that's crucial. So we are right now trying to unpack sustainability, which is start in, look, first of all, like I showed in the slide before, what are the stakeholders we have been engaging with? The partnerships that we have. V4MF is implemented by 9 partners. I show them on the first slide. So how we maintain our partnership and how we maintain our engagement with the stakeholders in the region, because we're there, the project finished, but new projects come, and definitely the stakeholders and the partners that we're working with are there, and we can continue that. So we've really been looking quite closely on how we can make that happen. We also produce a lot of knowledge projects, a lot of training, a lot of analytical framework, a lot of analysis, a lot of material that we feel like how we can also now sustain that one in where it can fit in our future interventions, and also to be aware over 5 years how much has been produced and you know, the potential that we now have to use it again on other occasions. And most importantly, we now also, that will come next week or maybe even this week, unpacking the sustainability of the outcomes and the achievements. You know, the things are moving on. It's not that we have done, okay, now there's a new, for example, I make the example before, there's a new Community Forestry Act in Thailand. We were able to influence it, that's done. No, that the ball is rolling. And we're now looking on how we keep that ball rolling and how we can continue to engage in the different, achievements that have been done. So again, sustainability is something that we really keep a strong eye and put a lot of importance on. I'm sure I might be over of the time. You can put maybe a last slide, but I just want to say thank you for allowing me to make this quick run to this presentation. I hope those of you who already knew Recov or even familiar with B4MF, maybe some new insights came, and I really hope, that this is an opportunity to embrace. It was called by the presenters before, David and John, the call on building partnership, building coalition, join hands. So we look very much forward to do that. We don't have to be in the main region. We're already joining hand with CIDT in West Africa and the Congo Basin on a study, by the way, on the perceived effectiveness of civil society networks. So the hand is there. Let's join forward, and we are very happy once again to have got the opportunity to make a presentation in this valuable forum. So thank you very much. That will be it from my side.
Thanks a lot, Robin. Thanks a lot, Robin. That was an excellent presentation. I think the point that you make about playing a bridging role. I think both EC supported projects have been really successful in sort of playing that bridging role. And the real question often is, well, what happens when the projects end, and how does that bridging role continue to be played? And the points that you made about reciprocal appreciation, I thought were really important, and sort of facilitating dialogue and creating those sort of safe spaces. Those are the kinds of things that I think will help us going forward in terms of making sure that government and non-state actors continue to have a conversation with each other. So thanks so much for highlighting that. I'm going to hand over now to Tibetius Hani from Burung, Indonesia. Dr. Gawi, I do not think will be with us today, unless I'm sort of informed otherwise in a bit. But Tibetius, if you could help us sort of conclude this session, that would be absolutely great.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for all of you. Thank you for the opportunity to share our experience regarding development of timber business together with community. The title of my presentation is Developing Community Sustainable Timber Business in Beliling Landscape in Flores, Indonesia. Beliling Landscape is located in eastern part of Indonesia, mainly in Flores Island, which is neighbor of Komodo National Park. That might be familiar for most of you. Total area of the landscape is 94,000 hectares. More than 13% of the landscape is private forest owned by community. So potential of trees in the landscape is quite high, and it should be one of source of community's income. They have planted so many trees, mainly teak and mahogany. These are two dominant tree plantations growing in the landscape. Next. As mentioned above, dominant tree plantation growing in the landscape is teak and mahogany. According census conducted in 2009, population of teak in the landscape is more than 3,100 trees. And now, 10 years are over, the population of teak and mahogany must be increased because replanting and native regeneration. In other side, the price of timber in the area was very low, and access to wider market was quite difficult because of limited processing and transportation challenges. Trees could not give any income for farmers. The low of income got from timber business mainly because farmers apply very simple timber processing and traditional trading. Sometimes they just sell the trees to buyer and let the buyer cutting down the trees by themselves. By applying this, farmers do not necessarily to manage any timber administration. This is done by buyer. Sometimes the farmer applies simple processing and sell the timber in form of beams and or boards. By this way, they only use main part of the trees, another part just wasted, and the rate of lodging and harvesting quite high. Those kind of trading applied in local market by local buyers and mainly to support middlemen. In this case, unfortunately, timber price is extremely controlled by middlemen. These are pictures showing you how the farmer use their own timber. They use less for their income, but they wasted more. The rate of lodging and harvesting is quite high to increase their income and meet their basic needs. The business that developed by community gave them very minimum income. There are three root of problem on this case. That is minimum processing applied, selling only in local market, and extremely dominated by middlemen. These are the factors that made community's timber business unsustainable. This is unsustainable business, both in economic and ecological perspective. So what kind of business we would like to develop? Certainly, we want sustainable timber business with community. The entry point to do this is maximizing income coming out from tree plantation and timber producing for community. 3 steps could be done. Apply maximum processing for timber, facilitate community to access wider market, and empower timber farmer to do their own business properly. By doing this, I'm sure the sustainable timber business within community will be met. We identified any key challenges for sustainable timber business with community. The first is ensure sustainable timber production to make sure that we can produce timber and all timber product for the future and long period. The second, ensure quality and legality of product to ensure the customer that our product coming from proper treatment and legal sources. There is no negative impact to the environment. The third, improving technical capacity in terms of timber processing. This is to maximize the use of timber and to make various products made of timber. Fourth, ensure positive impact to environment. Sometimes when economic benefit getting increased, business actors ignore or forget about environment. They cutting down the trees to meet demands of market without environmental consideration. The fifth, maximize benefit for timber producer. As producer, farmer must benefit more than others to keep their spirit for planting trees, producing timber, processing more product made of timber, and also keep committed to environment. And sixth, need to initiate wider and fair market to make sure that business more bigger and bigger. Following 6 challenges above, there are also 6 aspects of sustainability in communities timber business that we have been trying to achieve through the Forest Governance Project in Green Landscape funded by EU. That is sustainability in timber production, sustainability in timber quality and legality, sustainability in timber processing capacity, sustainability of positive impact to the environment, sustainability of benefit for timber producer, and sustainability of access to fair market. We have done some effort to meet sustainability aspect mentioned above, that is facilitating plus certification. Through very long and complicated process Finally, we got class certificate on 15th of September 2020. In terms of sustainability, this process helped us to meet 3 aspects. There is legality, increasing benefit for timber producer, and opportunity to access wider market. The second thing we facilitate is development of timber processing workshop. This workshop equipped by standard equipment and machine for timber processing. All the workers in this workshop have been trained technically in timber processing. This is just started in May 2021. In terms of sustainability, this helps us to meet 3 aspects. Increase benefit for timber producer, because farmers can sell their wasted timber to the workshop as material for producing any product made of timber. Second, increase technical capacity in timber processing. This workshop also trained other farmers besides ones that were trained in Jepara. In the future, demands of wasted timber will increase because so many farmers can use it to make any kind of product. And the third, this also provides wider timber market. In the future, farmers from Beliling not only sell timber logs, beams, or boards, but also any kind of product made of timber. Regular environment monitoring based on SPPL commitment. This is conducted quarterly by the farmer groups. SPPL is a commitment letter of class certificate holder to conduct environment monitoring. This is to make sure that community updated for any changes and take action as soon as possible for any destruction occur. And fourth is tree nurseries development and replanting. We also facilitate tree nurseries development and replanting. Besides for environmental sustainability, this activity also to support sustainability in production. We plant any kind of fruits plantation to change existing monoculture forest to be mixed agroforestry, which is good for biodiversity conservation. Sustainable land management, especially soil and water conservation. We facilitated this to make sure that the forest takes a function as watershed area to provide ecosystem services for community surrounding area. Land conservation also be facilitated to keep the function as good farmland by applying terraces system. They can use their own land for long period permanently and avoid to look for another new one. Now we can come to the question, what is the impact of those kind of activities? By implementing the activities mentioned above, there are some impact on environment and biodiversity. First is private forest land is continued to be buffering area for key biodiversity area or KBA of Beliling. KBA of Beliling is a habitat of endemic and globally threatened species like Flores monarch, Flores hanging parrot, Flores of eagle, yellow-crested cockatoo, Komodo dragon, etc. And the second, change in forest type from monoculture to mixed agroforestry. This is actually good for biodiversity conservation. And the third, decrease of surface soil erosion. This is to prevent land degradation and help farmers to implement agriculture activities without any external inputs like chemical fertilizer and chemical herbicide. The fourth, increase of land cover around water spring area. This is as a result of tree planting activities conducted by teak farmer groups, that the trees that were planted mostly native species. And the fifth is decrease of illegal logging. This is mainly because applying of class certification. As follow-up of this certification, region regulation of West Manggarai has been issued on provision of legal timber for government's construction project. This can restrict the trading and circulation of illegal timber, which certainly comes from illegal sources. I think that's all from me, and very welcome for comments or questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
2 points I'd like to make. Firstly, I think the work that you're doing with in terms of timber certification, I mean, that is precisely the kind of empowerment that we really want to achieve through this project. So getting local people to sort of understand the principles of sustainable logging and making sure that they're properly certified for that is central to, I think, the way we want this project to sort of run. And of course, the other point that you made, which I think was excellent, is us sort of acknowledging that sustainability is something that has to be considered at every point of the supply chain. And yes, we focus on some and not others, but it is something that requires a bigger and broader discussion. And that if we're going to address some of these issues, we've got to make sure that we're considering the entire supply chain as a whole. Thank you so much for that. We have 4 minutes till the end of the session, but I do understand that Dr. Gawe is now with us. Are we all okay to sort of have the presentation now? It'd be great if you can stay on. Dr. Gawe, would you like to present?
Anyway, my presentation will be on the National REDD+ strategy and forest governance in Papua New Guinea, particularly from global to national perspective. So firstly, if you can go to next slide. Just basically about reducing emission from deforestation. And as we know that initially when it was as REDD and when Papua New Guinea and Costa Rica proposed this, it was about avoided deforestation. But through different changes and policy changes, it now comes to include reducing emission from deforestation and to include the role of conservation, sustainable forest management, management of forest and enhancement of carbon stocks, and particularly targeting developing countries. So as you can see, I mean, from the International Climate Change Mitigation Fund, it is a kind of a mechanism that is for particularly for developing countries to go into actions in mitigating climate change. And this is mainly seeks to reduce greenhouse gas from the forest and particularly to improve our forest cover. I think in Papua New Guinea, in particularly, logging is one area where, and I think when the study was conducted in Papua New Guinea, the 2 main drivers of deforestation in Papua New Guinea is logging and deforestation to agriculture. But from international perspective, as you can see, that the REDD+ is a way which developing country that the forest can contribute to its mitigation of climate change. So actually, it is a kind of a financial incentives that in the form of result-based, and I think in the REDD+, there are four components which each country have to come first of all, and I think PNG has met all 4 of them. I think the one that I was mainly involved in was this strategy. This is PNG REDD+ strategy, and then the other one is the other 4 components, which I could not recall of them. I think one of these is a safeguard as well. So at the national level, we are looking at the more of what they call a result-based payment, meaning that each country that come up with their policies and policy measures and that leads to reduction in carbon emissions over the next 5 years will be measured periodically, and that is where the payment will be as a result-based payment and maybe paid at the national level. At the state, we are not really into like talking about how at the project level yet. Well, I understand that there's a number of efforts going on in terms of project-based emission reductions. But there are some things that we need to sort it out, particularly in carbon accounting. See, we are recording at the national level, and then there's a individual project also sharing carbon credit. We need to take into account that because we cannot double counting. So there are some things that we still are working on it. But from the national level, this is where we are heading, and I think this is something where I was heavily involved, so I can speak on that aspect. So from PNG perspective, you can see that I think REDD+ provides a significant opportunity to PNG to help its efforts to develop a low emission development pathway to recognize and supported by international community. This is basically, I have to say that through climate change, PNG has been receiving significant financial support internationally. And one of the major financial support that we had was through the World Bank Forest Carbon Partnership, which was just ended, I think, in 2019. But there's also other supporting program that is coming with support PNG in terms of REDD+. But this REDD+ is also leading to other things. For example, it helps us to come up with our sustainable land use policy, something we never had one. Since PNG got independent, we never had a sustainable land use policy. But through REDD+, it supported the country to come up with its yes. So I think through REDD+, we have been receiving significant financial support in different activities. And as the other support that we had was the European Union, who supported our national forest inventory. And this is what is a sort of a global requirement for each countries. And we European Union support us that way with our national forest inventory. It is a multi-purpose national forest inventory, which is to provide us with necessary information in terms of managing and developing our forest resources. So with our strategy, I think there are just three key action areas that I will just mention here in general. And this is the three key action areas in our national REDD+ strategy. The first one is strengthen land use and development plan. This is more at the national level. Strengthening environmental management, protection, and enforcement. And this is where forest management comes in. And then enhancement of economic productivity and sustainable livelihood. While we have to support our livelihood. Majority of 80% of our population live in the rural area, and they rely on our forest resources. So these are the three key action areas of our national REDD+ strategy. Okay, so as a result of this national REDD+ strategy, one of the activities that we came up with was the provincial forest plan. Under REDD+ and under World Bank Forest Carbon Partnership Fund, they supported us to revise and review our guidelines for provincial forest plan. And this is one of the things that we came up, and our provincial forest plan is a key area where we are looking into managing our forest. That's the starting point, because our law requires that all resource development planning should be started from bottom up. So one of the first thing that we did was this try to revise our provincial forest plan. And so you can see that our provincial forest plan, we are through provincial forest plan, we are actually operationalizing REDD+ at subnational level. So under our forest plan, we also come up with the provincial REDD activities. We under the provincial forest plan, each province is required to identify REDD+ activities, and with the REDD+ activities and even other activities, each province needs to come up with action program, and this is how they have to implement at the provincial level. Also, within our provincial forest plan, each provincial government have to identify provincial partners. We have particularly international development partners like USAID, OSAID, and now we have European Union. These development partners are helping our provincial government or our national government, but particularly at the provincial level. As we speak, we are currently in discussion with the European Union office in PNG and even USAID, trying to look to support some of our programs at the provincial level. So you can see that with the REDD+, I think our first activities or our first actions are towards our provincial level, at our provincial levels. And there are already 5 provinces that have been identified already to start undertaking some activities that will lead to implementation of the REDD+, our national REDD+ strategy. So the provincial plan actually tells us how we operationalize REDD+ at the provincial level. or at the subnational level. From our project perspective, you can see that some of the things that we are doing with Torres Strait Mountain Range or with TCA, Tenkele Conservation Area, actually we are really operationalizing a REDD+ at the project level too. So for example, like a Torres Strait Mountain Range mapping, this is in our REDD+ study, it requires a land use planning and proper mapping. So that's one thing that has been done, and I think that was done already. But when the university, under this project, university is supporting Tenkele conservation to improve on the mapping of the area. The other thing that we also did under Tenkele conservation, which is also part of contributing to our REDD+ actions, is this customary land demarcation and mapping. I have to say here is that customary land demarcation is one of the biggest challenges we have in Papua New Guinea. Customary land is a very sensitive area or issues. But with what we have done, we have trained the communities, and the communities will have use a GPS, and they themselves work out the boundary, and then they map the land itself on the map, and actually they demarcate it. And with that activities as we done, we map out or demarcated at least 50 villages, the lands, which is, I think, one of the, I must say that this is one of the success story of this project in here, because we never had customary land been clearly demarcated, but this is what we can do under this project. The other thing we did too is forest vegetation mapping. As you can see, our land use mapping, the key action area and the REDD+ is one of them is land use planning, and forest vegetation mapping is partly towards land use mapping. So under this forest vegetation, the other thing that we are also going to do is to the socioeconomic collect socioeconomic data, and that will help us to do a land use mapping. And land use mapping for the project area is very important, because this is where we will identify other activities that can contribute through this for community, to community livelihood. Because while the area project area is mainly for targeting protecting of this endemic kangaroo species, we also have to identify land uses that can give other alternatives to landowners or customary landowners for their livelihood. So I think this is a very important part where we are doing at the project level. So Tenkele conservation is one area that's already been leading in terms of these activities, which is directly contributing to REDD+ at the project level. So I think basically that's what I have regarding our REDD+ strategy here. We have still a lot more to do in terms of REDD+ at the national level, but activities at the provincial level and at the project level at the state is going, and which is it's a good sign of things to come in the future, because under REDD+ resource planning and development at the provincial level is very, very critical for Papua New Guinea. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gawi. I think the big thing for me is the work that you've done there with customary land demarcation and mapping, and this is something that's going to be really, really important in terms as a project output, in terms of what we take away and what we can sort of replicate, because these are difficult conversations that you need to have, and
yeah,
emerging from that process with a rigorous system that you've applied in PNG is going to help. I think other projects in Asia and in the Asia Pacific and more broadly. I think that the fact that there is so much reliance on forest resources, 80% of people relying on forest resources, again underscores the need to make sure that we emphasize that reliance in the conversations that we have on forests, which we don't sometimes do enough. Thank you so much for that presentation. I think more generally, we probably need to bring the session to an end. I think it's been an excellent session. I think we've looked at the high level sort of policy like sort of issues where we look at laws, rules, the effectiveness, the applicability, but then also zooming in on the importance of communities. I mean, you can have great laws and processes, but if you don't have communities that support those laws, understand those laws, are in a position to sort of take advantage of those laws for the benefit of forests and people, then we've lost the picture. So I think it's the project has been great in trying to sort of incorporate and integrate those two elements. And I think we've seen that in the context of the different presentations that we've had today. I think there are some questions that have come up in the Q&A box. We won't have time to deal with them today, but what we will do is to sort of pass them on to the different speakers so that they can sort of potentially come up with answers that we can then forward on more broadly. Thank you so much, all of you, for staying with us. And thank you so much to the presenters for your presentations. They've been excellent, and I think they've really sort of set the stage for the presentations going forward over the next couple of days. So thank you very, very much to all. Thank you, Richard, for your sort of organizing of this session, and to whom as well. Goodbye then.
Can I just say a big thanks to you as well? Thanks for looking after this last session so effectively. Really well done. Thank you all. Thanks for some really interesting presentations. Very, very thought-provoking. Lots to think about. Richard, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Vina. Thank you very much, Phil, and also thank you very much to our presenters. It was a really good session. Unfortunately, we ran out of time and didn't have time for Q&A, but it's not all lost really, because we'll try to direct the specific questions to the presenters, and hopefully we'll incorporate their responses in our report. But we'll also take into account some of the questions and issues that have been raised and incorporate them into our sort of on the last day when you look at some of the issues that have come up from this Forest Governance Forum.